The 5-0 Podcast.
5-0 Podcast.
Hey everybody, we're back at the 5-0 Podcast. It's your host, Haley. Today we are here with Eric from Blue Grit Wellness. He's an active law enforcement officer, a wellness coordinator, a police mentor and coach, and host of Blue Grit Radio. So for our listeners who don't know who you are, give them a quick bio about you, and then we will peel back the layers and get deeper about all the things we just talked about above. So everybody, welcome Eric.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Haley. As Haley said, I'll just expand on that. I've been a cop in Washington State for just hit 17 years. So it's been a crash course of things, like most people start in patrol at the ripe young age of, 22. There's an academy at 21. So on the younger side of things, field training officer, crowd control, peer support has been a fixture of most of my career. Got into canine work and then promoted to patrol sergeant. So street sergeant, team leader on some things, moved into recruiting most recently, a little stint in training, neighborhood response team, which is our community engagement, as well as longer-term problem solving. Patrol is the short-term problem solving, let's be real. The Band-Aids of the world, but very necessary. So most recently I've been in patrol command. So I'm a watch commander, oversee our wellness and peer support. And Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. And then the podcast has been a lot of passion projects melding with work culture and the types of conversations I believe we all need to have. And so it's been really rewarding to be connected with folks like you that are trying to carry those positive messages, because no doubt we have enough negativity. So happy to be here.
Totally. You have a laundry list of accomplishments in your career, and it's so amazing to highlight it, because what people see when they see you is they see this police officer, but what they don't know is all the things, or watch commander, for instance, they don't see all the roads that got you to where you're at today. And I am inspired by your page specifically and all the things that you've been through in your career. And I can't wait to get to talk to you about it. So I'm really excited. So I'm always curious to ask people about their family life and how they grew up, because it's either one or two extremes. It's either I had the best upbringing ever and nothing wrong, or it's like I grew up in this crazy environment, and that's what inspired me to become a police officer. So I just like to know how you got here. So tell us about your family life and your upbringing growing up, and then why you chose to become a police officer.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised partially in Memphis, Tennessee. So, a little shout out to the South. But my parents were first generation immigrants from China and Taiwan. And so, being that first, second generation Asian American, those that know, or those that have friends know, some of those dynamics, just different, right? Like family relations are a little different, how you express feelings, support, very different. A lot of the traditional things that are often stereotyped are very true for my family, which were, my parents definitely loved me in their way, which was just to push me to go to higher education, the typical fields of medicine, law, not law enforcement, but law school, engineers, all that stuff. So I was a pretty shy, happy-go-lucky kid. Those were the things that I tried. As far as family life, I wouldn't say I had a bad upbringing. I'd say I had a really good upbringing, but truth be told, there's a lot of consternation, a lot of conflict in my family. I actually didn't get along with my dad for most of my life. And so I think that's a common story too, especially young men that are going into something that they decide to go into a positive direction. Oftentimes it is something in the service of others. Oftentimes it is trying to prove this sense of masculinity, and looking back, absolutely, that was me, right? I didn't feel like I had a chip on my shoulder by any means until I was a young adult, and then wanting to kind of prove something and be something and stand up for the little guy, being the little guy for a lot of years, figuratively and literally, just being a tiny little kind of nerdy kid. So in a reflection, I don't have any bad blood or negativity kind of thinking about my family. Coming to amends with my dad, I think that's a big part of me and my story before he passed. But just to not not delve too deeply into that. I look back and I realized that was a huge piece of what brought me into public service. I had a huge affinity to those that serve, those in the uniform, whether they're armed services or first responders. And so it was really college. By the time I'd gone through half of my college career, I suppose I tried a lot of the traditional things, right, through classes or different job shadows, things like that. And so it was just Xing all these things off the list. Like, okay, pre-med, yep, that's definitely not for me. And then engineering was not for me. Math was not a passion of mine. And so it really just became this why not moment. Like, I'm just going to go for it. When I was late in college, I started diving in, just learning everything I could about police and fire. I didn't have a whole lot of resources or didn't grow up around that. And so it was really just, trial by fire, and tested my senior year. Fortunately, I got hired after some failed oral boards, some okay oral boards, and everyone knows that kind of struggle. Yeah, but that summer, when I was, I had graduated with my degree, I did get picked up by my agency in King County, pretty close to Seattle, Kent Police. It's I don't keep it a secret. And yeah, I've been there since. So they've afforded me a ton of opportunities, and it was really one of those agencies where I didn't know a whole lot about them, but I knew that they fought a lot of crime, like legitimate violent crime, and that's what brought me to them. I suppose them to me.
Amazing. So it's kind of like, for you almost like had the American dream, where you're first generation, you get to go to college, which is amazing, and then you become someone who serves their community. How did your family feel about you becoming a police officer?
It was tough. And my mom has come so far, and like just recognizing like how much she struggled, like so many, essentially single moms, putting my sister and me through school and doing the best she could, us being like latchkey kids that a lot of, I think millennials and old millennials might recognize. But yeah, she's come a long way in really recognizing like and expressing how proud she is of me. I think a lot of things are just cultural, right? Like truly like where she's from, like you don't become a cop if you have other tangible skills. And that might sound really negative. I mean, I'm sure you can get into really niche specialties and supervision, but just a lay cop, like a patrol person, it's basically like if you have it's like unskilled labor essentially. So I recognize that. My dad, like I said, I wasn't super close to them. We didn't talk about it deeply, but she gave me little nods. Like one of her uncles was a Marine for the Taiwanese government, and so he would give these kind of nods from afar, or in passing, where he's like telling me how to be safe and telling me how to be vigilant, and hey, watch their eyes. Their eyes will tell you everything. Kind of this old school thing. So I know that the support was there, but yeah, I love how you say like the American dream, because it wasn't my parents' American dream. It came to be mine, and a lot of that was really embracing American culture, which is to say like, the traditional views of like financial stability or higher education, they weren't part of my dream. But like serving others and being part of something bigger than myself, and then being able to choose, I think that is the American dream. So I love how you put that.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that it's so interesting. That's why I always ask this question, is just to see like we all have such like intricate stories that gets us to where we are now as police officers. And it's like humanize the badge, but it's like your first generation, like you went to college, like you are living the American dream, and people don't realize that when they just see you walking around in uniform, they just think of you as a police officer. So that's like my favorite thing to ask, because it's like that's a bread and butter of who you are, and everyone has their story. But thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your background in policing is very extensive, and you covered a little bit of that. So what, if you can pinpoint, what are your favorite units that you've worked in so far? And what's been your favorite experience or role that you've been able to play as a police officer?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was a most significant highlight was K9. That might be a little cliche for anyone that worked K9, and I'll say like,
everyone who's K9 loves being K9.
I know. I feel like everyone that in my circles and beyond, it's like if you worked patrol K9, so like a tracking dog, or if you worked patrol sergeant, like those are the highlights, right? And I will echo those sentiments. Looking back, man, like K9, I think a lot of it was me trying to flesh out what the areas I was weakest. I think police work wasn't a natural thing that I just excelled in. You know, my early FTO was super rocky. I was in my head too much, like second guessing. I'm a very analytical person, so trying to reference like the textbooks and the policies in my head rather than just letting your intuition guide you, right? Rather than just like go with the flow, try to fix the problem, and then use those other things as like reference points. So K9 was like trying to just get out of my head and just go with the flow, right? Like, and then just lead yourself, lead your crew, some of these ops, because it has to be like you're working with an animal, like a literal being that has his own prerogatives or her own prerogatives at times. My dog Kato, man, I wouldn't change anything, but he had an attitude like so many canines, and sometimes he didn't want to work. So it taught patience, it taught bigger picture. But I will give a curveball. Like one of my more recent roles was recruiting sergeant, and this was, you know, starting in 2021. I think part of the things that make it most significant to me are, one, I went into that role leaving my perceived dream role, which was like neighborhood response team, like community outreach. You can set up ops, you can make your own schedule, work a small team, like small unit dynamics. But the times were what they were, and it was really the thing that I thought I might be the person for this, or at least I think I can give it my best shot. And it's the way that I thought that I could help my agency and my region the most. And so, you know, that impossible task as I saw it, and just throwing everything I had at it. It was the opportunity to be the most creative that I've ever really had. And oftentimes we don't really have that in police work. And I think we need to breed more of that, thinking outside the box, engaging just different people, just meeting people. But also it helped me in a lot. I tell a lot of stories through my social media and just, you know, in my circles, because you talk to so many people that are coming in, whether they're young men and women, whether they're second, third career folks that have a family, but like why they want to come in, and that sense of purpose and why is so important. But we get burned out, and it's very natural, and we lose sight of that. We lose sight of why we came in. But to hit that refresh button and have all this positive energy around you for the people that want to do this, and they may or may not have that opportunity, because, you know, we don't take everyone, and it is an arduous road to get into. But that was super rewarding, and I think just about smack dab in my career to be able to affect that and be able to affect some of the people coming in, whether they came into my department or not. Like just to be, again, you know, as you put it, like a mentor, and try to give them whatever I could to help them along their way was super rewarding.
Yeah, I think it's rewarding, and I also think it's like probably one of the most important things in policing right now is we're just such a revolving door, and then at the same time we're having problems recruiting like quality candidates or even getting people to apply in general. So like a good person that's like a role model and an example for like an agency is so important, and agencies probably need to invest a lot more in it.
It's everything.
But I can, I can see how that could be really rewarding, and that's definitely something I am looking forward to in my career. And I've been offered it before, but I was actually in the same position as you, as in community outreach, and I didn't want to leave that creative position. But I think recruitment is so important. So in law enforcement, we obviously, and you mentioned it briefly as well, but we go through struggles, whether it's you know, a call that we go to, or a coworker that we're working with that we don't really get along with, or like you said, your canine might not have a bite for a couple months, and that's putting pressure on you, or toxic workplace environments. What is something that you could share, or like that you think that maybe in general police departments are struggling or facing right now in this country?
Yeah, you might be looking for something more specific, but I was literally talking to a colleague at a different department yesterday about this, and I think that when you put the question that way, like what is affecting everybody, and I think it's attitude, and I'll go a couple ways with that. One is, you know, we're coming out of some of the worst times our careers ever seen. I think like literal police historians might agree with that, and then people that have recently retired that have seen, you know, they've seen the 80s, 90s, like they would say, you know, the last couple of years was definitely the worst, right? The highest, there's data with the highest attrition, the lowest applications. We're coming back out. It doesn't mean the work is done or that we've have things fixed. We have a lot of work to do, but I think this is the time where we need to just stop the infighting. It's so much like this squad versus that squad, the union versus admin, the city versus the PD, like, you know, the sergeants versus the command versus the officers, detectives versus patrol. Like, it's all these like, well, they have it better or we have it worse. But like, you'll make it all true if you keep saying that, you keep believing it. And I appreciate being able to speak on this because I try to be mindful of how I come off. It was very different if I try to be positive as the peer support and, patrol sergeant. It's very different if I'm like, guys, come on, let's get along as a commander. They're like, okay, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it means so much when that peer leadership, and I really think that when people ask of their bosses to help fix morale, I absolutely do agree that, the higher your level, the more influence, or the more you say something can create positive and negative ripples.
1000%.
Yeah. However, it's not, you could have like the most upbeat, like actually pretty squared away chief, but if no one below him or her is actually committing to themselves to contribute positively to that culture, then it's all for naught, right? It takes every little step. And kind of like I said, like a lot of times it is the line level or, your first line supervisors that actually have more impact. Like they have more of that candid, like true time and space shared to build relationship. And that's what builds a team, is relationship.
Yeah. And I find that like when your direct supervisor is like more of like a positive role model, you respect them more, it like trickles down to your squad, right? Because you're all happier to come to work, right?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
it definitely, and you want to impress your boss, you want to make him happy because you respect him. And then you're working harder, not sitting on your ass. And that creates productivity, which creates X and X, and it just keeps going from there. But it's interesting to hear you talk about it because of all the people that I've talked to just personally and through this podcast or connections, it's like we all have like the same view. Like you're all the way in Washington, I'm in Florida, and it's interesting to hear that as police departments across the country, we're all kind of facing the same issues.
Yeah, totally
And
same.
yeah, and it's like you said, we're not out of the woods yet in a sense of where policing has been at its low. And when we're at our all-time low, and then inside the police department, we're also at our all-time low with each other. It is just a snowball effect of just sadness. Truly.
Yeah, you need a foundation to build on, and it's like control what you can, and you can certainly control your own outlook. You control how you interact with your squad mates. And then from there, you can build this positivity. Like, right, you can lean on each other when you're feeling a little sour. But I mean, there's a time and place for venting. But then, venting becomes the B word. And then that's really nothing good comes from that, right? Let's think about what we can do about it. Let's think about how we can lead up. Let's think about how we can build these, these relationships or, some collaboration, whether it's through the union, whether it's through your first, for your direct supervisor or just your squad, right? Like control what you can.
And this wasn't one of my questions, but while we're on the topic and you're a supervisor, how do you feel, like what's a way that you feel you could improve? And it's kind of what we just talked about, but improve camaraderie with like your squad mates or your shift mates, because I feel like for me, even personally, I've only been on this job for 6 years, but from the day I stepped onto the job till now, we first started off as getting, breakfast after shift on midnights. And then, till now, it's so different. I feel like people don't want to share their lives or hang out and things like that. So how do you feel like it's a good way to build camaraderie in the workplace?
Yeah, that's hard. Directly with my department, there was a big shift when we went to take home cars years ago, because
Yes,
you used to
100%.
have, love it, hate it, choir practice, or just versions of that where you get breakfast after graveyard, go to the local diner, or you go, happy hour after day shift. Like those are these built-in things where you literally decompress and you're not in uniform, you're on the radio. Like it is great when you can do barbecues and stuff at work. Went to 12-hour shifts. It was more of that, right? Because you're spending so much dang time at work and commuting, like rightfully so. You should get back home to your family and your people and decompress. And so finding the thing that works for your culture, I think like to start vague would be like meet people where they are and just build some sort of, helpfulness, right? This attitude of helpfulness, like you can get a long way if you just look to how you can better serve your partner. They hate this type of call. Okay, you're always there. You're always there to help them, or even take that call. It's like scratch my back, you'll scratch mine kind of thing. And then, for the supervisor, it's the same, right? Like, see what your people need, what their drivers are, what their motivations are. And it could be at work, outside of work. I like to say, like, sometimes I write about how this can't be your whole life. It's a job, but it is more than a job. It's a culture. It's a lifestyle. And so oftentimes I try to flip to people that I work with, like, hey, you might be that patrol cop, because we all know them, that say, like, I love patrol. I don't want to talk about specialties. I don't want to talk about detectives. Cool. Like, what would be cool to learn then, right? Whether it's training or just picking brains, but also, like, what can I help you with outside of work? Like, you're really good at some things outside of work that I have no idea about. And likewise, like, can I help you in some of these things, right? Can I help you with your nutrition? Can I help you with this? I don't want to push it, right? But, like, just let me know I can help. And even if they have to scratch their heads and come back to you, or even if they don't really want to come back to you, you got to follow up. But, like, I think, again, like, that's an actual action and invitation that is built on care, right? If your people feel like you care and support, back to the beat partner example, like, that's the majority of it, is just trying to show up, being present. I think that's a common gripe amongst the troops for supervisors, that they never see them, they're out of touch. And so you have to do what you have to do to try to combat that. And I think that, to my own, I guess, my peers and to myself, sometimes I'm like, you may never get to that place that you want to feel, where the guys are all like, oh yeah, like, Tung gets it, he's here. Like, if I was here all the time, I wouldn't get any of my assigned duties done. And so there's a balance. Like, some things I have to back burner. But to those that are in supervisory roles, I'm like, hey, if you got to put it in your calendar to step away from your desk, then do that, because it's worth it. You need to.
Yeah. I think, like you said, action and care. It's like the simplest thing, just even if a supervisor asks me, like, they know, I do this podcast, and they'll say, like, hey, Haley, I listened to that episode. I am like, are you serious? Thank you so much. Like, just a tiny little acknowledgement of things that you're doing outside of work or inside of work. Hey, that traffic stop you did yesterday, really great job. You sounded great on the radio. Something that's small. I think definitely builds camaraderie in the workplace. And it's so important for those small wins that you hear from your boss or from your partner. Like you said, I hate this type of call, but my partner can knock it out in a second. He knows about it. He'll come save me, basically, like, that stuff goes a long way, and it is important. Okay. So there's something that you share on your social media, and in 2014, you experienced a life-altering call. I don't want to spoil it, but can you paint the picture for our listeners and tell us what happened to you that day?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was back in K-9 days. It was a day off. And essentially what happened at work, it's like your typical, the time that you think nothing's going to happen, right? It's midday, late morning on a Sunday, shopping area. But essentially, like, we had a hard
supposed to be your lazy day.
Right. And I wasn't at work. So it's kind of like when you kind of, in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, nothing's going to happen. So I'm getting my haircut. But anyway, I get called in because one of my coworkers, who's on overtime, he's a hard charger. He's like super cop. But he goes to this seedy motel. He sees what looks like a hand-to-hand. He makes contact with one guy who's trying to duck him, but then he starts talking to him, and he gives this bad name, and he's reaching his pockets, and this whole thing, he starts reaching and flips around, tries to sucker punch the officer, and he takes off running. By then, the next backup had arrived, and then they're watching this guy running and digging in his waistband. So they kind of peel off, and the guy takes off. They pass witnesses. They're like, he's got a gun. And now he's like in this crowded area, and you have, probable cause for his arrest on several things. You don't know who he is yet. And so heightened concerns, like, through the roof. So I get called in, and we do a K-9 track. Fast forward, we've worked every direction. We had the scent, we lost it, not finding the gun, and it kind of isolated back to this closed, fenced in landscaping company, like, where they store all their stuff, equipment, some trailers. And essentially, like, it was the summertime, like July, and those that work K-9, like, yeah, your odor is kind of killing off in the sun. It's kind of cooking off. And so it's really our last ditch effort in this one place that's like the only place that makes sense, unless he really broke containment early and he's long gone. But we essentially checked this area, and we're rooting around. By now, there's several officers with me. There's one that was on kind of a close perimeter that hops in to help, put eyes on and just help us search. And my dog Kato, gets super hot, like under this tractor kind of riding mower thing. And at that moment, you get so complacent. We've been searching for hours that I'm like, get out of there. Like, I think he's on an animal or something. The way he perks up because it's so sudden. And then he drags out this coat. And then the initial officer's like, that's his coat. And then we all have like these chills. And then you're back up to like, okay, stuff's real. Like, he was here. Is he still here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And as we keep checking, he gets super interested in one area. And this is like a Quonset hut that we're all under, which is essentially this like tarp structure. You think about commercial kind of farming stuff where it's open on the front and it's closed off on the sides and the top. He's trying to get behind all this stuff, this cabinet. And then one of the sergeants that was with me was a prior canine. So he moves up because he's just like, hey, he's trying to get back here. So as a backing officer, he kind of moves up, tries to move this barrel. And then I hear, show me your hands, show me your hands. And he ducks back and I just see this head pop up and pop back down. And then I hear like pop, pop, and then pop, 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 pop. And so, I've already drawn at this point. I start firing at where I last saw the guy along with several officers with us. Like, we're kind of in this arc. And the recollection for me in the moment, because time distortion's a real thing, is, like I did the cadence of like pop, 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 and then it was boom. And then this whoosh and this blast of fire comes towards us, and it's just passing over. And I remember seeing this fireball like move towards me. I duck my head, I raise my arms up to shield from the blast, and I remember just thinking like, well, this is it.
Wow.
Done deal. Like, I guess it was a good run. So this passes over, and then I just remember it being like intensely hot. All I could think about was how just it, it's like you're in a, I think for people that have been, of course firefighters know, but I've been in a fire tower once where they turned up the jets and you're kind of crouched in the corner. You're like, this is terribly uncomfortable. So it was like that, but beyond. And so it passes over. I basically walk in a circle and I'm like, I'm still here, I guess. And then just kind of come to my wits. I'm like, this isn't over. Do my like reload, eject a magazine, pop another one in, and then just trying to gather my senses. So being super disoriented for a while, but then realizing the fire had passed and now everything's on fire.
Oh, wow.
One of the guys is crawling away. One of the guys is wincing in pain, and we grab him, kind of drag him out as he's crawling, and we get a little bit away. Fortunately, and some of the details are kind of scattered, but
I understand.
Someone called officer down, which, is one of the most chilling things that anyone can hear, dispatchers, cops alike. People on the outside were absolutely terrified, along with us on the inside. Luckily, and I'll remove a lot of the stress, but the initial officer ducked out of the way, and we called it like a matrix move. Like, he just fell like backwards to the side, and he didn't get hit.
Wow.
The officer we were dragging out, he was reacting to the pain of the fire because his head had gotten singed. His back was literally licking off, the flames were licking off his jumpsuit, his uniform, and we were patting it out, and just because of the heat. And once we got him out, we, checked him up, unzipped, doing all the trauma checks, and he didn't get hit. No one got hit. So that was fascinatingly, miraculous, I suppose.
Yeah.
How many shots were fired, and then someone's calling, hey, where's your dog? And I didn't even think to call him because I was like, I just assume he's gone, and I don't even really want to face that fact at the moment. And at the same time, we're like, we need to get out of here. And where's the suspect?
Right.
Well, he's got to be dead. So we're all just kind of trying to gather our senses and gather each other, and get out to the gate. Well, around that time, I start calling for Kato. I'm not seeing anything. We're hearing all these pops and hisses from all the fertilizer and all these chemicals.
Right.
And we're like, this is not good. Like, I've seen the stuff then, like,
we need to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, we got to get out.
Yeah.
Suspect actually comes out of the flames, and he starts kind of limbering over and started going towards the gate. And so we engaged him with more gunfire. Actually, someone on the outside had a rifle and took him out with a headshot. And then it was as you're trained, cuff him up and let's drag him out. By now, several officers had come into the area trying to evac us and him, reduce more stress. Cato did come out and scabbered out, and he had some like singed fur hairs, singed like vest, but he was okay.
Wow.
So the running joke of him was like that he had 9 lives like a cat. And so, but we were able to get out, and, I had 2nd-degree burns. So I post about that, and a lot of it is really just recognizing, like, for me, that was, a lot of us that have worked the street for a while, especially in a busier area, we have these really close calls or these bad wrecks or these almost wrecks. And like, that's like, I think sometimes we don't pay attention to the things that could have happened or were close to happening. I don't think we give enough credit to the officers that like don't pull the trigger, and they were right in that moment, and they kind of had their future lives flash before their eyes of like the bullets, but also the lawsuits and all these things. But not to go down that tangent too much. But this was like one of the main ones for me, very iconic, where I was like, man, like that was close. I don't know how that worked out. I'm no scientist, but I just came out of that with this extreme gratitude for everything, like life itself, relationships, my people, the work, and being able to still navigate that healthfully. Certainly had like, critical stress from that, but from a combination of things, I was able to continue doing the job, and I still am. So I'm grateful for that. And that's like, my heart goes out to those that aren't able to because of the things that affect them so significantly. So a lot of things, and certainly just try to reflect on that point, because that is a common reaction where you have this euphoria out of a near-death experience. But, and also that sometimes bleeds into not so healthy things as well. But just to bring, it's some of my personal reflection. Before I even started Blue Grit Wellness or the podcast, like I went to Facebook a couple times, and that was one of them, just kind of reflecting, just to share kind of some of myself. And really, like, it was a lot of that sharing, post 2020, that gave me the momentum and the support and kind of the encouragement to do more on social media. But yeah, that was the main crux of that incident.
Well, I'm glad you're okay, and all of you guys are okay, and Cato. Do you have like any burns still on your body?
I do. It's just more scarring. You probably won't be able to see on this video, but
You kind of see it. Yeah.
it's kind of like speckled, and there's a spot basically aligned with my short sleeves. So I got a buddy who was a neighboring agency in K9, and I would always clown on him for wearing long sleeves in the summer, and how uncomfortable it must be. But he'd always clown on me whenever I got scraped up with brambles. He's like, sticker bushes, and he's like, that's why you wear long sleeves, man. And I wouldn't wear a hat, and it would like scratch my face. He's like, you dummy. And then so it was one of those moments where he would continue to revisit. He's like, you might not have those scars if kind of thing. So it was just fun. But yeah, 2nd-degree burns on both my forearms. Wow. A little bit of singed eyebrows, but yeah, luckily I was wearing a hat, or who knows, like, I put product in my hair, and so some of the jokes at at work are like, man, you're about to. I was literally about to get my hair cut. Like the clippers came on, and I got my phone ringing. But yeah, who knows how it would have got up. So again, grateful for that too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned Cato. And like we talked about in the very beginning, people love K9, and those are just like the dream of a lot of police officers. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with Cato and like where you guys are at today?
Yeah. So we worked together, I guess about 6-7 years on the street. I retired him when I promoted to sergeant, and I got, he's got to stay with the family. He actually didn't make it super far into retirement. He enjoyed a good chunk, like a year and a half, 2 years. Then he had a major like medical episode. He had this like ruptured spleen. I'll spare the details, but it was a pretty quick passing. But luckily, I'm grateful my wife was at home. She saw it happen. I was able to come in and take him in, spend last moments with him. But yeah, man, like there's so many ups and downs. And like I said, we would joke, my wife and I, that he had 7 lives, and I think I could count them all. Like, for until the last moment, it was jutting across the street on a DV, and where this car, like I didn't see it, and I didn't anticipate him sprinting across the road, where I just let my long lead go, and it was like, Jesus, take the wheel. And like, if I hold him up, he'll probably get hit, and I let go, and then the car rolls over and kicks the lead up in the air. And I was like, dang, that was close. And then times were like way too close to the train tracks. Those trains move fast. Yeah. So, just these terrible kind of freaky, guttural. Before our shooting, when we were a newer team, assisting a neighboring city. So our relationship was very, I guess like our time together, our career was very volatile with incidents.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, like I don't even know that he would have been like the ideal dog to be selected. He came from a police dog family, but there's parts of him that were just a bit more sensitive, and he wasn't like the highest drive, hard charging dog. That some canine surveyors or trainers would be like, I don't know, maybe he's going to be a really good protective dog, like home dog, but like probably not like a working dog. Some of the indicators, like whenever he was injured or I was injured, like he was just fine at home. Like he had no real like determination to go to work. Where I was super guarded and not treating him like a dog. Like I literally called him the work dog all the time, because I didn't want to have this unhealthy balance with him. I didn't want to have hesitation putting him into, or myself into, a bad spot for the community, because it's hard, right? Like when it's your pet, it's like a family member, but it's hard anyway. So all that said, some of the moments I was so grateful that it was him and that it was me and it worked out as it did. But I wouldn't have traded anything. I wouldn't trade him or our experience for anything. Be it like the hardest biting dog or whatever. Or the dog that I never had to chase out in my yard trying to get him back into the car to go to work. Like, in the moment you just want to, like, your brain's about to explode. But yeah, just so grateful. And it's reflected on him. It's just tough because it's such a different dynamic. And I talk about that a little bit in some of my podcasts, talking about pet grief, even unlike this. It's such a unique bond where it's like it's not just your animal, it's not just your pet, it's like a coworker. And then when you're in this stuff together, you're like, holy crap, like this is nuts. Like, and I have buddies and coworkers that are like, they're so grateful for a specific call, or they're so grateful that it worked out as it did. So I think, like, I don't have all the answers, and I don't believe like in fate in the sense that we can't control our destiny, but I think that there is something to, like, hey, things work out for a reason, or there is potential merit to how things work out. And so a little bit is that release and just, accepting and being grateful for what we have.
Yeah. I obviously haven't had a canine, but it's interesting to hear. And I know most people say the same thing, but it's like this like bond that you can't explain that you have with your animal. Like they save your life, like or are willing to save your life with no thinking, no nothing. They're just like there to protect you and your coworkers no matter what. And that bond is like so insane.
Yeah,
and I know that,
right?
None.
And
it's wild.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. Wild. And that was one of the worst feelings in my whole career, is like, not being out of work with burns for 6 weeks. Like I said, I was elated in a lot of ways, but like when he was on the operating table after being stabbed, like I felt so powerless. I felt so helpless. And here he was. He took a knife. That could have been me. More likely not, because I only got called there because of canine. So like, just brass tacks, like it could have been another officer. Absolutely. Right. And so we all recognize that. I think that's why there is this emotional and symbolic bond that I think all uniformed personnel feel towards our service dogs, because we're like, dang, like you're out there, period. And that's why, there's such a tie to the community. I think that most people, whether they're dog lovers or not, they recognize like, dang, this dog like has been in more stuff and like truly exists for protection of others and the community at large, like doing more service, as I put it. And not to sound really bitter, like at times I was like, man, these dogs do more for others and strangers than like a lot of people ever care to entertain to do for other people. So And that's not to like disparage people. That's just to, I think, recognize and highlight like what some of these dogs and are able to do and willing to do, which is nuts.
You mentioned your canine got stabbed. Wasn't the same day as the situation you just told us, right? Is that what led him into retirement, or did he continue working?
No, that was earlier on in our career, and so luckily it was like a felony domestic assault suspect, like brother on brother, hit him in the head with a garden implement and put him in the hospital. But he basically ran off behind the house in the woods. And long story short, when we found him, he was just there, non-compliant. He wouldn't get on the ground. He wasn't running away, in which case, at the time, case law would have supported officer shooting that guy, absent the ability of the dog. And he had, at the same time, if he came at us, you could use force. And I'm talking about after he stabbed him. So when he didn't comply, sent the dog, heard this yelp, right? And I was like, holy shit, did he get stabbed? Because it was dusk, and I saw kind of the silhouette of the motion, like the jabbing motion, and pulled him back, and he's like rear and ready to go. Like he's trying to do his job, which is pretty nuts too. But we're at an impasse. Different states might be different, but I knew for us, you can't shoot somebody because they stab your dog. But 10 CV Gardner at the time, and I say like post 2020 with especially Washington State, if he were to flee, we would have rightfully, justifiably shot him because he's armed with a knife and did all that with a prior crime as well. If he ran towards us, there's an articulatable like, hey, he's coming at us with a knife. But when he just stood there, not doing anything, we're like, it felt like an eternity. It was probably just moments, but it felt like an eternity of like, what do we do now? We got to get this guy arrested. We got to get Cato to aid. But the whole thing's kind of a blur, but we basically tried, the officers tried moving up, with at gunpoint, tasing. I don't remember if they OC'd. It's been so many years I haven't read the report, but and then once he dropped the knife, it got kicked away, and then officers did what they did and got him into custody. But then at that point, once I saw them pile on, as we all are so good at doing, it's effective. But basically, I'm just like, I got to get him out of here. So I went from carrying him, this 80-pound dog, and all my gear after we've been tracking, to seeing how elevated he was and panting and kind of uncomfortable. I was like, man, maybe I just walk him. And I remember just having that no-win solution. I was like, what's gonna slow down his heart rate more? Or obviously not good for him to be trotting, losing blood. But if I'm carrying him and he's more, uncomfortable, kind of agitated, I don't know. Luckily, it was a big paved trail where an officer, and I didn't know the area at all. I just knew go this way and try to work my way out. It was one of those bigger paved trails where an officer was able to move the stanchion, access it. We were able to hop in the back, and then he got us to an emergency vet. Unfortunately, it was right behind his shoulder blade, and it was at such a shallow angle that it was more fatty tissue, barely nicked. The good stuff or the muscle. Luckily, different angle, different story, as far as lungs and all the important stuff. So that was super, super fortunate.
Oh my God. And that was the beginning of your canine career?
That was earlier on. I want to say that was year 1 or 2. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So you learned quick that this is this is serious, having your dog, and you could lose your dog in these situations, your partner, your best friend.
Yeah. You asked me early on, what did my family think about the job? And when I actually thought I'd go into investigations again, because I was academic and I was pretty studious as a kid. I was detective, that could be a thing for me. But it was just, getting in the job. I loved the thrill of the chase, and I got really into fitness because I wanted to catch the guys, and then I wanted to overpower the guys, and all these things that led me to canine to be the guy, that part of the guys that get the guys that would otherwise get away. The really dangerous ones. But I remember just surface level, and my mom's like, "You're trying to be canine?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's really cool because you get a backup all the time." I tried to twist it into I'm safer now. And years later, I revisit it. She's like, "I knew you were full of crap," right? She just didn't pry. But she knows, at this point, I got to do what I got to do.
Yeah. I love it. So you shared your stories, and like you said, when all these things first started happening to you, you started sharing online, and then obviously you gained following. Tell us how you started your social media platform and your podcast, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm, harking back to 2020, just, the world felt upside down in so many ways, and our friends are leaving the job, understandably, friends and colleagues. And so, I think law enforcement is just so hurting. And, I'm in a left-leaning area and region where I just felt this sense that so many people that only knew me from high school or only knew me from this, when I would speak and try to write some reflections on how the nation was reeling and how law enforcement was reeling, and I was like, hey, this thing happened in Minneapolis. Like, it's not all cops, and a lot of us like hate how that happened, right? Like, just to say that candidly, and just share some messages of like how we need to be more together, not divided. There are a lot of people that came out of the woodwork from all pockets and times in my life where they said like, dude, I remember the the ASB kid and like the choir kid and just like the nice guy, like you're who we need more of to be cops. Like, we don't need these bullies out there. I'm like, and that was like such the backhanded compliment to like our community, because I'm like, actually there's so many men and women that are better than me. There are so many like women and men that like that they do like, they pour it on like twice as much as I do. Like, I spend time with my family at times. Like, there are some that like they can't turn it off because they're service bound. So just from so many years of being a peer support and wellness and trying to think about how we can take care of our own and take care of each other, it just made me recognize like that need to humanize the badge, which is like, that can mean so many people for so many things to so many people. But it was just to say like, hey, I'm a dude that you may find credible because of my past, you may find credible because of my present, or you may not at all, but there's someone for everyone. So I feel comfortable enough. Like, I feel one is like I'm allowed to for policy and culture, which is great. For those that have to hide their agency or choose to, that's cool too. But I was in a place in my life and my sense of self and my career where I was like, I don't care if this pisses someone off. I don't care if this blocks certain doors or certain job opportunities, because I want to speak for me. I try to keep it positive, not political. Anything could be quote unquote politicized or taken politically. So like that, that's with a grain of salt, but sharing that, and then just, Blue Grit Wellness, like the word is, a lot of it was more peer support, mental health and physical health, right? Like, I've been a self-experimenter with workout and nutrition through like my whole career. And so through the years, people have always picked my brain and just been curious what I was doing or giving people advice. And so a lot of that was like sleep. Like, I went through the whole ringer on like trying to work out my sleep on Graves and things that help, things that hurt. And so just being that studious person that's always like consuming through articles, blogs, podcasts, what have you, just to share that, right? Like, just create this free resource that could help people in all veins. And it's kind of grown, my Instagram, the blog is less active on my website, but then the podcast was, all of it's just trying to be helpful, like see like where I'm needed, where more of this conversation's needed. And so it's parroted and kind of followed my work assignments, because that's what I think about, an unhealthy amount of time, like, you're more than your 40 hours a week, time off, just thinking about how do we crack these different things, right? We talked about morale, culture, training was a thing. So I'd post more about that, but then hiring was a huge thing. And that's where, that was kind of in tandem building our social media efforts at the PD for hiring. But then the podcast came a lot out of that, because we're like, man, we could talk to, one-on-ones or small groups, but we could also like talk about policing and then put it out for anyone, right? And so a little bit of scalability, and then a little bit was reach. And then so my recruiter and I, like some of our first episodes were like him and me, and then just bringing people in. And again, like, I mean, really now, if we were to boil it down, it's wellness, it's leadership, and culture, right? Those three things I think are integral to what we need as police and what we need to keep building on. And we're gonna get there. We're making strides. We just need to keep up on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm thankful that there's people like us who share stories and wellness realities, because before I started, even just 6 years ago, there wasn't really outlets that I could find to just even learn about becoming a police officer. Like even someone like me, my dad's a police officer, but I still had no idea what being a police officer was or meant.
Sure.
So opening those doors for people who are maybe even just thinking about like the smallest thing is going into this career. It's like it's great whether you're new or you're about to retire. There's a community to be had here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what goals do you have for the future and your career and Blue Grit Wellness? What do you see for yourself moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's hard and I don't know how to answer it, which means it's a great question. I continually ask myself that, and at one stage, like maybe roughly a year ago, I was just grow the podcast, right? Like just frequency episodes, put it on social, build reels, and I found it to be unsustainable for me. And then it's like a prioritization where you almost have to put it on paper because I'd be on my phone so dang much that like go to my wife, like to say like, hey, like when you're here, sometimes you're not here. And that was like when I was in recruiting, I was trying to manage that account, my account, schedule podcasts, and editing more than I do now. Right. So like sometimes good is better than perfect. Cause you can get good out now and not sacrifice all these things. And so right now I'm trying to, my goal, and it's not a good specific goal, but it's just establish more balance, like a better balance. And I feel really good about that. Like I'll make commitments to myself, put them in my planner to like hit the trail or go on a bike ride, like get outside. I'll make myself do something, not just hit the weights, but something like more restorative to me. Like to be in nature is very restorative to me. So, and then spending more time in intention with my daughter. She's 5. So I know like these are the times that you never get back. And like, so we're 2 years ago. And so on and so on, right? So it's just trying to, and it sounds bad, like maintain, because it's not like I'm already starting to record more than I was. But it's just trying to be in the moment and recognize, with the social media and the podcast, I initially, and I revisit this a lot, is I wanted to build a vehicle and I didn't know where I wanted to go. And sometimes some of the goals of that can shift based on life and career and what's needed. And so I'm just trying to be in tune and stay in touch with that as it goes. I spoke to another podcaster where, his sentiments echoed mine, where he's like, sometimes I just think about just taking a break, and then you get this message from someone that's like, this was so helpful, thank you so much. And you're like, this is why I do it, not because of followers, not because of the tangible analytics, but because of the real worth, because you can absolutely have a conversation with a new officer or your PD. But if you could have that theme and 50 people or 100 people can listen to it and get that value, like, why not, right? And so I think that's such a powerful tool and a gift. So long-winded, that's where I'm at with all that stuff, and just trying to find that right balance for me, because I'm just coming up on, I suppose, 10 months as a commander. So I'm 2 months of probation left. So I haven't pissed off anyone bad enough yet. So
you have a lot going on. And me saying that is a lot because I got a lot going on. And I appreciate your time and you being here. And for anyone that's listening, where could we find you and follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on Instagram. It's Blue Grit Wellness, all one word. Blue Grit Radio is the podcast, Spotify, Apple, all the big players. And then, you can hit me up if you're just not on the socials. You can email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much for being here today and your busy life.
Thank you.
And sharing. And I love following you personally. You're super inspirational. I love that you share like your stories and you're raw and honest. And I really appreciate you again being here. So thanks so much.
No, thanks, Haley. And I'm excited to have you flip onto Blue Grit Radio. So listen to that, tune in for that.
Blue Grit Radio. Yay. Thank you so much.